The wind howled through the mountain pass, carrying with it a bite of snow and the smell of pine resin split by the storm. A cabin stood alone on the ridge, weather-beaten and scarred, its walls patched with rough-hewn logs and hides stretched to keep the winter air from creeping in. Inside, a fire burned low, casting orange light across a man's face hardened by years of silence and survival. His beard was streaked with gray, his eyes sunken, yet alert, watching the flames as if they might turn into something else, something from past. For months, he had heard nothing but wolves at night, the crack of ice on the river, and his own breathing. Solitude was his companion, and for a man who had once lost everything to the world of other people, it was safer this way, until the pounding came at his door. At first, he thought it was the wind slamming loose timber, the storm shaking the walls. But then came the voice, faint, cracked, desperate. "Please, open. Please." He rose slowly, every bone stiff, every instinct cautious. He unlatched the rifle resting by the hearth, the barrel gleaming in the firelight, and moved toward the door. He pulled it open against the wind, and the night spilled inside. A woman stood there, her face streaked with blood and date, her clothes torn from running through brush and snow. Behind her, a small figure clung to her skates, a child, shivering, eyes wide and dark. The woman fell forward, half into his arms, half into the cabin. Her lips moved, breath misting in the cold. "Please, help her. They are beating my mother for being Chinese." The word struck sharper than the wind itself. He steadied her, lowering her onto the floor by the fire, his rifle still in hand. The child pressed against his side, silent, watching him with fear and hope tangled together. The man said nothing at first. Words came hard to him, like prying open a lock that had rusted shut. But his mind was already racing. Settlers, violence, a mother dragged into the snow, punished for nothing but her face. He had seen cruelty before, watched men justify blood with greed and hate. He had left that world behind. And yet, here it was, knocking on his door, bleeding on his floor. The woman coughed, voice trembling. "They came to our camp, said we didn't belong here. My mother tried to speak to them, but they spit on her. They—" She choked on the words, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on her cheeks. "They dragged her away. I ran. I had to find someone. Anyone." The child, no older than 8, tugged at the man's sleeve. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Please, mister, don't let them kill Grandma." The man looked at them both, and something twisted inside his chest. Memory burned. The echo of screams, the smell of smoke, the sight of his own wife's lifeless hand slipping from his grip when he had been too slow, too hesitant. He had built these walls to keep such visions out, but the truth was they had always lived here with him, in every shadow. And now this woman's plea dragged him out into the open once again. He turned away, pacing to the window slit, staring into the storm. He could see faint shapes moving below in the valley, lanterns swaying in the night, voices carrying faintly through the trees. The settlers hadn't gone far. They were hunting her family. He clenched his jaw. Solitude had kept him alive, but it had also kept him empty. Every time he told himself he was done with people, some part of him knew he was lying. And now fate, or God, or chance, had thrown this broken family at his doorstep. He breathed out, a long hiss of steam in the cold. The woman spoke again, weaker now. "If you won't help me, at least take her." She pushed the child gently toward him, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Say my daughter." The man turned then, finally meeting the child's gaze. The girl's eyes were wide, black as obsidian, brimming with both terror and the kind of trust that no man deserved without earning. It pierced him, cut deeper than any blade. He crouched, placing a rough hand on her shoulder, and for the first time in years, he spoke more than a few words. "I'll help you, both of you." The woman broke into sobs, the sound half relief, half exhaustion. The child clung to him as if the world had finally given her one solid place to stand. But even as he said it, he knew the cost. The settlers outside weren't just drunkards looking for a fight. He had seen their kind before, men who fed on weakness, who believed violence gave him the right to decide who belonged and who didn't. To face them meant dragging himself back into the fire he had sworn never to walk through again. And yet, Looking at the girl, he knew there was no other choice. He moved quickly now, every gesture precise. He stoked the fire higher, warming the woman, tore strips of cloth to bind the scratches on her arms, and set food before the child. His movements were brusque, but beneath them ran a current of urgency. He gathered his rifle, checked the powder horn, tightened the leather strap on his knife. The storm outside was rising, snow whipping in sheets across the valley, but the settlers' voices carried clearer now. Laughter, coarse and ugly, mixed with shouts. "They are close," he muttered, mostly to himself. The woman stayed, fear tightening her features. "You don't know them. They won't stop." "I know men like them," he answered, his tone low, steady, "and I know how to make them stop." The child crawled to his side, her small hands clutching at his coat. "Promise you won't let them hurt Grandma." He looked down at her, the weight of her trust pressing on him heavier than any rifle. He gave a single nod. "I promise." Outside, the lanterns moved nearer, weaving like fireflies through the trees. The laughter grew louder, closer, accompanied by the crack of boots on frozen ground. The man stood tall, his shadow stretching long across the cabin walls, the rifle resting against his shoulder. The woman clutched her daughter, eyes flicking to the door with every sound. The storm raged. The world seemed to hold its breath, and in the silence between the settlers' shouts and the crackle of the fire, one truth rang clear. He could no longer remain a man apart. The wilderness would not shield him from the choice laid before him. Either he stepped into the fight and risked everything, or he turned away and proved himself the coward his nightmares accused him of being. The door rattled in its frame, fist pounding against the wood. Voices jeered. "We know you're in there. Hand her over, old man. Hand her over and we'll let you be." The mountain man's grip tightened on his rifle. His heart hammered, not with fear, but with a fierce clarity that comes when a man realizes a time for hiding has ended. He had been given another chance, one he never thought he'd have again. He would not waste it. He glanced once more at the woman and child, their eyes wide, shimmering with fear and fragile hope. He took a deep breath, set his feet firmly on the wooden floor, and leveled his rifle at the door. "Then come and take her," he whispered. And as the first axe blade struck the wood, splintering it in a shower of sparks and sound, the mountain man knew his solitude was over. The reckoning had begun. Snow whispered against the broken door as dawn spilled gray light over the cabin. Smoke from the night's battle still hung in the air, mingling with a metallic tang of spent gunpowder. Outside, blood stained the snow where settlers had fallen, and the silence was a heavy thing, broken only by the crackle of dying embers. The mountain man stood rigid by the window, his rifle leaning against the wall, his shoulders stiff with the weight of what had been done. He had killed again. After years of silence, the old ghosts had returned, their chains rattling inside him. Yet, when he turned, he saw the woman and her daughter curled together by the hearth, alive, breathing, untouched. That, he told himself, was worth every ghost. But he knew the night's fight was only the beginning. The men outside had not been alone. Others would come, and when they did, they would come with fire and fury. Staying here was death. The only chance was to take the woman and child and lead them deeper into the wilderness, where few dared to follow. It would be a road harsh and merciless, a test of strength not only against men but against nature itself. And he was not certain the woman, nor the girl, could endure it. He packed quickly, every movement sharpened by urgency. He gave the woman his spare cloak, rough and patched, yet warm enough to keep the wind from freezing her to the bone. For the child, he fashioned mittens from torn cloth and wrapped her feet in dry hide. He gathered jerky, dried berries, flint, and powder, stuffing them into a leather satchel. His knife slid into his belt. His rifle hung across his back. When all was ready, he looked to them. The woman met his eyes with silent resolve, though her lips trembled with fatigue. The girl clutched a small carved token from her grandmother, the only piece she had managed to save. "Stay close," he said simply, his voice gravel in the morning chill. They left the cabin behind, snow crunching beneath their boots, the rising sun casting pale light through the trees. The path he chose was no path at all. He led them through dense pine, over frozen streams, across ridges where the wind threatened to throw them from a mountain itself. Every step tested their endurance. The child stumbled often, but each time the woman lifted her gently, whispering encouragement in a language soft and musical, foreign to the man's ears but tender in its cadence. He pretended not to hear, though the sound stirred something forgotten in him. By midday, their breath smoked heavily in the air, and hunger gnawed at their bellies. They paused only briefly, crouched beneath a fallen tree where the snow formed a small shelter. The man tore dried meat into strips, handing them out without a word. The girl chewed slowly, her eyes never leaving him, as though studying the way he moved, the way his hand never strayed far from his knife. When she smiled faintly at him, the smallest curve of her lips, it unsettled him more than the settler's jeers. He had not been smiled at in years. As they walked on, the silence of the woods grew heavy. Only the wind through branches and the occasional crack of distant ice filled the air. Yet the man's instincts, honed by years of survival, prickled with unease. They were being watched. At first it was only a shadow at the edge of his vision, a flicker between trees too swift to follow. Then tracks appeared in the snow, barely visible, light as if made by one who knew how to walk the earth without leaving a mark. He said nothing, not wanting to frighten the woman, but his rifle stayed close in his hands. The first night on the road, they camped near a frozen river. He built a fire carefully, tucking it behind rocks to keep the glow hidden. The woman gathered close to the flames with her daughter, their faces softened by the warmth. The man kept watch, crouched at the edge of the firelight, eyes scanning the dark. The storm had cleared. Stars glittered above like shards of broken glass, and the silence was so deep he could hear the blood in his ears. Then, out beyond the tree line, he saw him. A figure stood, tall and motionless, half cloaked in shadow. A man, but not a settler. Long braids caught the starlight, a bow resting in his hand. His eyes reflected the fire like an animal's, sharp, unblinking. For a long moment they stared at each other across the void, the mountain man and the silent stranger. No words passed, no movement beyond a steady rise and full of breath. Then, as if the night itself had swallowed him, the figure vanished. The man did not speak of it, but in his gut he knew the stranger would return. The road grew crueler with each mile. Snow turned to sleet, rivers swelled with ice-crusted water, and the forest thickened into a maze of thorns and roots. The woman's steps faltered, her lips blue with cold, but she refused to complain. When the girl stumbled, she lifted her again and again, even when her arms shook from exhaustion. The man watched her with grudging respect. Fragile though she seemed, she carried a strength most men lacked, the strength to endure for someone else. On the third day, hunger drove them to risk a hunt. The man tracked deer prints through the snow, his breath misting in the bitter air. Hours passed with nothing but silence and empty tracks. Finally, he found a rabbit caught in a snare not his own. He froze, studying it. The trap was expertly made, woven with skill. He turned slowly, senses alert, and there, half hidden in the trees, stood the stranger once more. This time, he stepped into view. A native warrior, tall and lean, his face marked with paint faded by time. He held no weapon raised, yet every line of his body spoke of power, of patience sharpened into steel. The man raised his rifle slightly, not in threat, but in readiness. The warrior studied him, then the woman and child who waited nearby, their eyes wide with fear. After a long silence, the warrior knelt, freed the rabbit, and tossed it toward the man. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. That night, the rabbit roasted over the fire, its smell rich and savory. The girl laughed softly for the first time, the sound fragile as glass but bright in the bleak night. The woman smiled too, relief softening the lines of her face. The man, though silent, felt the weight of that gift. The stranger could have killed them easily, yet he had given them food. A warning, perhaps, or a gesture. Either way, it bound their fates tighter. As the days bled together, the man wrestled with his own mind. Each mile of harsh road was not only against the wilderness, but against himself. He dreamed of his lost family, his wife's voice swallowed in gunfire, his child's cries smothered by smoke. Each time he faltered, he remembered the girl's small hand clutching his coat, the woman's whispered plea. He was not only carrying them through the wilderness. He was carrying himself toward redemption, one brutal step at a time. The settlers, however, had not forgotten. One night, as they huddled in a cave for shelter, torches flared in the distance. Voices carried, drunken, vicious. The man's chest tightened. They had found them. He motioned for silence, pressed the woman and child deeper into the cave, and readied his rifle. The flames drew closer, the settler's laughter echoing against the stone. His hand steadied, breath slow, eyes sharp. He would not fail this time. The mountain slept beneath a shroud of snow, silent but for the groan of trees bending under ice and the rasp of wind sweeping through the ridges. In the faint glow of dawn, the cave where they had taken shelter looked less like a refuge and more like a tomb waiting to be sealed. The man stirred from where he had sat all night, rifle across his knees, eyes never fully closing. The women and child lay bundled near the embers of the fire, their breathing shallow but steady. Outside, tracks of blood and scarred the snow where settlers had fallen, yet the echo of their voices still haunted him. This was not over. The men he had slain were only fragments of a larger horde, and vengeance would come hunting with a fire greater than the cold could extinguish. He stepped out into the biting air, his boots crunching against ice, and let the wind sting his face awake. The warrior was there, standing a short distance away, silent as stone, watching the horizon with eyes that had seen too many dawns. They had not spoken a word to one another, yet the man felt the bond tightening like leather stretched under strain. They had bled together, no further oath was needed. Still, the silence between them was heavy with unasked questions. Who he was, what his purpose might be, and why he had chosen to aid strangers when he owed them nothing. But the man did not ask. Some truths were better left unspoken. By midday they were moving again, leaving the cave behind, crossing frozen ridges where avalanches whispered above and rivers beneath ice roared unseen. The woman stumbled often, her breath shallow, yet she pressed forward without complaint, her daughter clinging to her hand. Each step carved into the man's chest, the reminder of a vow unspoken but absolute. He would see them through, no matter the cost. Still, doubts gnawed at him. His strength was not endless. His wounds ached from each mile, and behind them death walked in the boots of men too stubborn to abandon their hate. On the 5th day, smoke curled into the sky on the horizon, black and bitter. The woman froze, clutching her daughter to her chest, her voice breaking. "That's our camp." She ran forward, stumbling through snow until the man caught her by the arm, forcing her to slow. When they crested the rise, the truth lay before them in ash and ruin. The camp was gone, reduced to smoldering timbers. The woman's breath hitched, and she fell to her knees. The girl buried her face in her cloak, muffled sobs filling the silence. The man scanned the wreckage with narrowed eyes. Bodies lay scattered, settlers and kin alike, frozen where they had fallen. But one thing was clear, no sign of the mother. The woman's gaze darted wildly, hope and despair colliding in her eyes. "She's not here. Maybe they took her." Her words trembled, fragile as glass. The warrior crouched, studying the snow. His fingers brushed over tracks, boot prints, heavy, too many to count. He looked up, meeting the man's eyes, and gave a single nod. They had taken prisoners. That night, as they sheltered in the skeletal remains of a cabin, the woman sat in silence, staring into the fire, her face a mask of exhaustion and grief. The man sat opposite, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes, the sound scraping into the silence. He remembered another night long ago, fire reflecting on the faces of his wife and child before death took them. The weight of his failure pressed hard, but beneath it stirred a flame he thought long extinguished. He would not fail again. The warrior finally spoke, his voice deep, steady, each word measured. "They will not let her live long. If you wait, you lose her." His eyes flicked to the woman, then back to the man. "But if you go, you may lose yourself." The man met his gaze, the steel in his eyes answering what words could not. Some losses could no longer be borne. The march to the settlers' camp took 2 days, each hour thick with tension. Snow gave way to mud as the path descended into lower valleys where the air was damp and the trees hung heavy with moss. At night, the cries of coyotes circled them, a chorus of hunger echoing their own. The girl clung to the woman, who clung in turn to the promise the man had made. On the 3rd dawn, they saw it. Settlers' fires burning in a clearing, a circle of wagons drawn like wolves, sentries pacing with rifles in hand. From the shadows they watched. The man's jaw tightened when he saw her. The woman's mother, tied to a post, face bruised but eyes still fierce. The settlers jeered at her, tossing scraps of food to the ground as though mocking an animal. The woman beside him gripped his arm, her whisper sharp as broken glass. "You swore." The man's heart pounded, not with fear but with a clarity so fierce it burned. He had lived too long in silence, too long in hiding from his failures. This was the moment fate had carved for him. Either he stepped forward and claimed his reckoning, or he died as the coward he had once been. They planned with few words. The warrior would move first, a shadow slipping between trees, arrows cutting silently through the outer guards. The man would strike from the front, rifle in hand, knife at his belt, fire in his chest. The woman, though he told her to stay back, refused. She would not abandon her mother again. Together they moved as night fell, each breath measured, each heartbeat counting down to the storm. The first arrow flew silent, embedding in a guard's throat. The man surged forward, rifle cracking thunder, fire bursting into chaos. Settlers scrambled, shouting, gunfire answering, flames spilling as lanterns crashed. The clearing erupted into a storm of sound and fury. The man moved with deadly precision, each shot ringing with purpose, each strike fueled by years of buried rage. The warrior was everywhere at once, arrows whistling death from the dark. The woman darted toward her mother, cutting bonds with trembling hands, tears streaming as she pulled her free. But the settlers were many, too many. The man felt the sting of a bullet graze his side, hot blood soaking his shirt. He staggered but did not fall, knife flashing as he drove it into the chest of a man who lunged at the woman. Gunfire roared, smoke choking the air, bodies fell, cries echoing into the night. The fight dragged into chaos, but at last silence fell, broken only by the crackle of fire and the moans of the dying. The settlers lay scattered, broken, their rage extinguished in blood. The woman clung to her mother, sobbing into her shoulder, the girl wrapping small arms around them both. The warrior stood still, blood streaking his face, his bow lowered, eyes unreadable. The man leaned against a shattered wagon, breath ragged, blood pouring from his side. The world swam before his eyes, but he forced himself to remain upright. The woman turned to him, her face streaked with tears, her voice breaking. "You saved her. You saved us all." He tried to answer, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he looked at the girl, who stepped forward, small hand gripping his. Her eyes shone with gratitude, with trust, with something he had not seen since his own daughter, innocence unbroken by hate. The warrior stepped close, his voice low, certain. "You cannot walk further. If you stay, you die. If you go with them, you will only slow them." His gaze was steady, merciless yet honest. The man knew it was true. His strength was fading, each breath shallower than the last. He could not walk another mile. He looked at the woman, her mother, the child. They had their lives again because of him. That was enough. "Take them," he rasped to the warrior. "See them safe." The warrior inclined his head, a gesture of respect deeper than words. The woman clutched his hand, tears falling freely. "We won't leave you." "You must," he whispered. "Go. Live. That's the choice I make." The child's grip tightened, refusing to let go, but the woman gently pulled her back, her sobs muffled against the night. Slowly, reluctantly, they turned, guided by the warrior into the shadows, away from the ruin and fire. The man sank onto the snow, the flames of the camp flickering around him, the stars above wheeling in silent witness. Pain gnawed at him, but beneath it was peace, a rare and fragile thing. He had failed once, long ago, but not this time. He had chosen to fight, chosen to save, chosen to be more than the ghost he had become. That, he thought, was enough. His eyes closed, the sound of their footsteps fading into the distance, carried away by the wind. And though the night pressed heavy and the cold crept in, a faint smile touched his lips. Reckoning had come, and with it, his choice.